All right, welcome to your very own deep dive. Today, we're going inside prisons.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at California, Taiwan, and China.
Hmm.
And we've got 3 YouTube documentaries to guide us. So we're going to kind of start off with a system I think a lot of us feel like we know at least a little bit about.
Okay.
And then we're going to get into some stuff that's probably a bit more uncharted territory.
Sounds good.
So, it's going to be interesting to kind of see how different countries, how their prison systems reflect their values and their cultures. But obviously, I think we're going to see some common threads, too.
For sure, yeah, absolutely. I think the struggle to balance punishment with the hope of rehabilitation, that's pretty universal.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's jump right into California.
Okay.
The documentary we're looking at is called A Living Hell, Welcome to Prison.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of throws you right in. It's overcrowded cells. The threat of violence is everywhere.
Okay.
And we meet this guy, Kevin, who's been in and out of prison since he was 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
And that's a story you see so often, that cycle of recidivism, right? He gets out, he tries to build a life, he's got a wife and kids, but he ends up back inside.
It's like what is it? Nearly half of inmates reoffend.
Right. It's a staggering statistic. And what really struck me about Kevin's story was that even when he seemed to have a chance for a stable life, like he had a family, he had that support system, but there was something like a pull almost back to that life.
Yeah. It makes you wonder if the system itself is almost setting people up to fail. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the documentary shows how hard it is for people to get back on their feet after they get out. Finding work, housing, shaking that stigma. It's a huge uphill battle.
Absolutely. And you have to think about the psychological impact, too. I mean, just the trauma of prison life, that constant fear, the lack of control, the separation from your loved ones. It's hard to come back from that.
Oh, yeah. And there's this scene where one of the inmates, Jonathan, he loses his partner while he's inside.
Mm-hmm.
And you just see the guilt and the grief just kind of wash over him.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize that a prison sentence, it doesn't just impact the individual.
It ripples outward, right?
Right.
It affects their families, their communities.
The documentary does a really good job of showing the dedication of these inmates' wives, the ones who visit regularly, try to keep things normal for their kids. It can't be easy.
Yeah, it's like they're serving a sentence, too, in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
The documentary also, highlights all these regulations and the security measures in place. I was actually surprised by how ingenious the inmates are. They create these makeshift ovens. They find ways to sneak in phones so they can get on the internet.
Well, it shows you how strong that human need for connection is, even in an environment like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it also makes you wonder about those security measures, right?
Right.
Are they really working if inmates are constantly finding ways around them?
Yeah, it's like a constant cat and mouse game. Yeah.
There's also this other thing that the documentary looks at, and it's some alternative approaches to rehabilitation. They show this program at the ICE's detention center.
Okay.
Inmates run little mini business there. They learn about structures of society, and they actually get to contribute to charity too.
It's interesting, right? It's about giving inmates some sense of purpose, preparing them to re-enter the world. Of course, it's a small-scale program.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to solve all the systemic issues, but it at least offers a different perspective.
Right. We also see the complexities of parole, the electronic bracelets, the semi-freedom, conditional release. There's always this tension between giving someone a second chance and, the worry that they might reoffend.
It's a tough balance.
Yeah. And actually, the documentary wraps up with Rashid's parole hearing. And he desperately wants to get back to a normal life. But the judge is obviously worried about his past. And it just leaves you with this question, how do you measure someone's potential for change? Okay, so we're going to shift gears now, head over to Taiwan. We're going to see a whole different approach to incarceration.
All right. Sounds good.
Our documentary is Behind Bars, Taichung Men's Prison. It's supposed to be one of the toughest prisons in the world.
Wow.
Yeah, almost 5,000 inmates. A lot of them are serving life sentences or really long terms for drug offenses.
It's interesting how different cultures view different crimes. What's considered a serious offense in one place might be treated very differently somewhere else.
Yeah, for sure. The documentary emphasizes the security measures from the very beginning.
Okay.
It's multiple checkpoints. They're constantly being watched. Guards are super vigilant. You get this immediate feeling of oppression. you know?
It makes you wonder about the purpose of prison, right?
Right.
Is it just about punishment and isolation, or is there room for rehabilitation even in a place like that?
Well, the documentary does show us some of that. We meet this guy, Wang. He's a cell boss, but he's actually taking part in rehab programs. He's writing to his family, trying to earn early release.
It's like even in this system where hope seems like a luxury, you still see people striving for change. Right?
Yeah. Makes you wonder where that resilience comes from in an environment like that.
Yeah, is it genuine remorse? Is it just a survival tactic?
I don't know. Maybe it's a mix of both.
Maybe.
Then we got Hang, who used to be in a gang. He says he's turned his life around since going to prison. But it's hard to know how much of that is real.
It's hard to know how much is just adapting to survive in that system, right?
Right. The documentary also gives us this glimpse inside the prison kitchen.
Okay.
Like inmates are cooking for, I don't know, thousands of people every day.
Right.
And the way they run it, it's all about these strict routines, these procedures.
Makes sense, I guess. In an environment like that, you need order, you need control.
Yeah. There's even this whole thing about how they receive packages from the outside, all the inspections to make sure there's no contraband.
Yeah. It just emphasizes that separation from the outside world, doesn't it?
It does. It makes you realize how much those connections mean to them and to their families. Like, there's Lai, he's been inside for over a decade. He talks about how much time he feels like he's wasted, how much he misses being free.
There's a real sense of regret there.
Yeah. But the thing is, they're always being watched.
Right.
Like, the documentary says they have over 1,000 cameras in this prison, constantly monitoring everything. It's kind of creepy, honestly.
Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it? Security versus privacy, how much surveillance is justified?
Yeah. So we've seen California, we've seen Taiwan, and now we're going to get into what might be the most, the most challenging part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
China. The documentaries we're looking at here are China's transplant crisis, the forced organ harvesting of the Falun Gong, and China's secret internment camps.
Wow. These are some serious allegations.
Yeah, right away you get this feeling of, like, unease. They talk about how hard it is to get solid information about China's prison system.
Right.
And when things are that secretive, something's probably not right.
It's a red flag, for sure.
Yeah. And then there's the Falun Gong.
Okay.
It's this spiritual group that the Chinese government sees as a threat. And they're specifically targeted within this system. So the documentary China's Transplant Crisis, it focuses on these allegations of forced organ harvesting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's pretty disturbing stuff. We hear from people who claim to have witnessed it firsthand.
Yeah.
Like there's a surgeon's wife who talks about her husband being involved in these practices.
It's hard to verify those claims independently, of course, but the documentary does make a strong case. They talk about how quickly people can get organ transplants in China, which suggests there's this ready supply of organs.
It's hard to even imagine, isn't it?
It is, and they connect this issue to the whole forced labor system. The idea is that basically it's profitable to keep the prison population high.
Right, because you have this workforce, you have this source of, organs. It's
a really dark picture.
Yeah. It's like people become commodities.
Yeah.
And it's hard to know what's really going on because of how complicated the supply chains are. It's difficult to hold companies accountable. There's this story about this girl in England.
Okay.
She's like, I don't know, maybe 10 or 11 years old.
Right.
And she finds this note hidden in a box of Christmas cards from Tesco.
Oh, wow.
It's from prisoners who are being forced to work in a factory in China.
So it could be happening anywhere and anything we buy.
It's really unsettling. And on top of that, they've got this new anti-espionage law that makes it even harder for companies to make sure their supply chains are ethical.
So it's even harder to know what's really going on.
Exactly. And if we can't even get accurate information, how can we even begin to address the problem?
That's a good question.
It's overwhelming, to be honest. But the documentary ends with this call to action. They want us to raise awareness, to support organizations that are fighting for change, to use our power as consumers to push for more transparency.
So we have a responsibility, right?
Yeah. It's easy to just ignore it, but we can't.
We can't. Even small actions can make a difference. Researching the companies we buy from, talking to our friends and family, just keeping the conversation going.
It's got to start somewhere, right?
It does.
So we've gone from California to Taiwan to China.
Right.
We've seen 3 very different systems, all with their own challenges, their own complexities.
It really highlights the vast differences in how societies approach this, doesn't it?
It does, and it makes you think about your own role in it all, you know?
Absolutely.
What can you do to make a difference?
Yeah.
That's something I'm definitely going to be thinking about.
Me too. So this Taichung men's prison, it's huge.
Yeah.
Nearly 5,000 inmates.
Wow.
A lot of them are there for drug offenses, serving like really long sentences, some even life.
It makes you think, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
we consider serious enough to lock someone up for life.
Yeah.
It's so different everywhere you go.
It really is. Yeah, it's a whole other conversation probably. But right from the beginning, this documentary, it doesn't shy away from showing you how tight the security is.
Yeah, you were saying all the checkpoints.
Yeah, multiple checkpoints everywhere you go, constant surveillance, guards always on edge. You get this feeling right away that this place is all about control.
It kind of goes back to what you were saying before. Like, what's the point of prison? Is it just about keeping people locked up and punishing them? Or is there space for something more like rehabilitation, even in a place this intense?
Yeah, that's the big question. And the documentary does give us some glimpses of that. There's this guy, Wang. He's actually a cell boss, but he's involved in some of the rehab programs they have, writing letters to his family, working towards early release.
It's interesting, right? Like, even when the whole system seems designed to crush any hope you might have, you still have people trying to change.
It's that human spirit, I guess. Like, even in the darkest places, there's always that flicker.
It makes you wonder what keeps them going. Is it guilt for what they did? Or wanting to get back to a normal life? Probably a bit of both, I guess.
Probably. And then there's Heng. He was part of a gang before he got locked up. Claims he's a changed man now because of what he's seen in prison.
But how can you ever really know, right? Like, how much of that is genuine change and how much is just learning to play the game to survive in there?
It's impossible to say for sure. It's a really tough one. The documentary also shows the prison kitchen, how they feed thousands of people every day. And the way it's run, it's all about routine. Everything's by the book.
Well, I guess when you're dealing with that many people, that many, I don't know, potential problems, you need to keep things running smoothly.
Yeah, for sure. Every little detail is managed. I mean, even how they get packages from the outside, all the inspections, making sure nothing gets in that's not supposed to. It's a constant reminder for these guys that they're cut off from the world.
Yeah, all those connections that we take for granted, it's a huge part of what they lose. Yeah. And their families, too. Like, there's this guy, Lai. He's been in there over 10 years. He talks about all the wasted time, how much he just wants to be free again.
Yeah, you can feel the regret in his voice, you know? Like the weight of the choices he made. It's a powerful moment.
But then again, there's that constant feeling of being watched.
Yeah.
They have over 1,000 cameras in this place. Like, every corner of that prison is being monitored.
It kind of makes you wonder if that ever really goes away, even when they get out. Like, that feeling of someone always watching you.
That's got to mess with your head.
Yeah. It really makes you think about the trade-offs we make for security, right? Yeah. Like, how much privacy are we willing to sacrifice? And what's the cost of that in the long run?
So we've looked at California, we've seen Taiwan, two very different approaches to prison. And now we're going to head into what might be the most challenging part of our deep dive.
China.
Yeah, China.
This is where things get really dark.
Right from the jump, there's this feeling of unease. Like, they talk about how difficult it is to get any real information about the prison system there. It's all very hush-hush.
And that lack of transparency, that's a huge red flag.
Yeah. It makes you wonder what they're trying to hide. And within all this secrecy, there's the Falun Gong, this spiritual group that the Chinese government sees as a threat. And they're being targeted, specifically.
This Falun Gong.
Right. So one of the documentaries, China's Transplant Crisis, it focuses on these allegations of forced organ harvesting.
Forced organ harvesting.
Yeah. It's a pretty disturbing stuff. They have people claiming to have seen it firsthand. Like, there's this interview with a surgeon's wife.
Yeah.
Who says her husband was involved in these practices.
That's a serious accusation.
It is, yeah. And of course, it's difficult to know for sure what's going on, but they make some compelling points. Like, they talk about how people can get organ transplants in China way faster than anywhere else, which suggests they have this ready supply of organs just waiting.
That's chilling.
It really is.
Yeah.
And they tie this whole thing into the forced labor system. The idea is that it's profitable to keep the prison population high, you know, because you have this workforce, you have this source of, well, organs. It's really messed up.
It's like people become commodities.
Exactly. And it's hard to know what's really going on because the supply chains are so complex, it's difficult to hold companies accountable. Like there's this story about this girl in England. She finds a note in a box of Christmas cards from Tesco.
Okay.
It's from prisoners who are being forced to work in a factory in China.
So it could be happening anywhere, in anything we buy.
It's a scary thought, isn't it? And then on top of all that, they've got this new anti-espionage law
Yeah.
that makes it even harder for companies to make sure their supply chains are ethical.
So it's even harder to know what's really going on.
Exactly. And if you can't even get accurate information, how are you supposed to even start to fix the problem?
Yeah, where do you even begin?
It's overwhelming. But they end the documentary with this call to action. Like they want us to raise awareness, to support organizations that are working on this issue, to use our power as consumers to push for more transparency.
It's a huge problem.
It is. But we can't just ignore it because it's uncomfortable.
Absolutely not. We have to do something.
Right. Even small actions can make a difference, like researching the companies we buy from, talking to our friends and family about these issues.
Keeping the conversation going.
It's got to start somewhere, right?
Well, that was a lot.
Yeah. We went from like the struggles of getting back on your feet after prison in California to this super strict Taiwanese prison. And then, well, the stuff in China, that was heavy.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. I mean, it really shows you how different places look at this whole idea of punishment, rehabilitation, all of it. And it makes you think about the systems we've created, the choices we make, how they affect other people.
Yeah. One thing that keeps sticking with me is how a prison sentence, it doesn't just affect the person who's locked up. We saw how hard it is on families, on relationships, the whole community, really.
It's easy to forget about that, right? Like all the lives that get turned upside down because of someone else's choices. And it makes you wonder, are we doing enough to help those families? Are we doing enough to make sure people can actually get back on their feet after prison? Not just the inmates, but their loved ones too.
It's not just about the person behind bars. And then there's the whole issue of forced labor, especially in China. It's scary to think how easy it is to get caught up in those systems without even realizing it. Like, we try to make ethical choices, but how can you really know where everything you buy comes from?
It's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And it's so complicated, all these supply chains, it's almost impossible to trace everything back to its source. But I think it starts with awareness. We need to understand how everything's connected, how our choices here can impact people on the other side of the world.
It's a bit overwhelming, to be honest. But we can't just turn away because it's hard.
No, you're right. We can't. Even small things can make a difference. Doing some research before you buy something, supporting organizations that are fighting against forced labor, just talking to people about these issues.
Right, just getting the conversation started. That's got to be the first step.
Exactly.
So that was our deep dive into prison systems around the world. California, Taiwan, China. 3 very different places, but each one raises some serious questions about how we deal with crime, punishment, rehabilitation, the whole thing.
Yeah, it's complex. There's no easy answers. But hopefully this has given you a little more insight into these systems, the challenges people face, both inside and outside the prison walls.
Yeah, and maybe it'll make you think a little differently about the choices you make, how they might be connected to these bigger issues. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better world.